this still here? When Mom and Dad left you the house, they had to leave this too?
Dad would let Mom take it. I put it up on eBay. Turns out not as valuable as Mom thinks.
Okay, so here's the plan. Lunch, beers, finish up the bike. Good?
Good. I picked up a couple steaks.
No, you didn't. You're gonna do your...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Take a run at that, you know. Like cooking? You good? No, I'm serious. Not as good as I am with engines, but...
That was almost a compliment. So close. I've thought about it, but...
I'm feeling.
The facility is controlled by the ATCU.
Like cheese. Look for new Cracker Barrel shreds for layers of flavor in every bite. Start with new Cracker Barrel shreds, end with amazing.
All you gotta do is hold 'em and kiss 'em and squeeze 'em.
New Philly Whip. Soft, fluffy, and perfectly spreadable. Your toast is going to love it. Philly up.
For a bit.
I laid out all the parts for the bike. They're in the right order. All you have to do is install them.
Thanks. Make your lunch. Bolognese. Even pork if you want some.
Yeah, that sounds good. But, I have to think, so...
The Big Mac? Not without Canadian beef farmers. Because we proudly serve 100% Canadian beef. Learn more at ourfoodyourquestions.ca.
What the hell are you doing?
Shotgun axe. You beat them. You did that.
This is hard on me, I tell you.
Little Caesar's stuffed crust deep dish pizza. It has cheese in the crust. No way!
Little Caesar stuffed crust deep dish pizza with cheese in the crust. Just $13.99.
Ready.